Hello everybody and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary, where I do the research to try to teach you a little something about what you're drinking. Today we're going to be talking about a straight bourbon whiskey called Maker's Mark. Now it's a staple in many whiskey drinkers' homes, and today we're going to find out why. The Maker's Mark distillery can be found in Laurento, Kentucky, and is owned by Beam Suntory. But it was founded by a man named William Samuel Sr. in 1953, and he founded it when he bought the Burke's distillery for about $35,000. The first bottling was in 1958. Now the reason for this is he couldn't really take the time to age different whiskeys, different mash bills for 3 or 4 years before he decided on one that he liked. So what he did instead is he actually took the different mash bills, the ratios, and cooked a loaf of bread using each one. Now he tried it, he had a few people try it, and basically they decided on the one that had no rye in it, which is exactly what this is. This is 70% corn, 16% wheat, and 14% malted barley. Now, the Maker's Mark distillery is among a small select group of distilleries that will actually move their barrels, because one thing that you'll know if you ever do some research in this is that a lot of distilleries have their warehouses temperature controlled. Now this makes sense because you want to produce a consistent product. However, they're not one of those. So what they'll do is they'll have the barrels up on the top floor and they'll let temperature kind of do its thing, and by the time that they feel like it's hit the right taste, they'll bring it down to the bottom floor because there's not nearly as much fluctuation in temperature there. Makes a more consistent product. So very recently, in actually 2017, about a month ago, they were nominated, or actually they won the award for America's Best Innovator. And the reason that they did this was because they allow enthusiasts to take a finished barrel of Maker's Mark and actually add some wood stabs to it, or staves to it. There's maybe 9 or 10 different types to choose from, and they're allowed to add up to 5. And then they finish it for another 9 months. This produces a slightly different flavor to the Maker's Mark, and is something that, if you've got the money, you can try. Now, I did actually try to find out how much it cost. Couldn't find the price anywhere, so I'm gonna guess it's pretty expensive. Outside of that, the distillery has 3 main offerings. They've got the original Maker's Mark, they have Maker's 46, which I'll probably talk about in a future episode, and then they have a special one that they put out once a year that is the Maker's Mint Julep. Now the funny thing about that, instead of the red wax, they use a green wax, which makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about the whiskey. So Maker's Mark is one of those whiskeys with a name that you don't really think about. But if you take the half second to think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? Maker's Mark. It is the mark that a maker leaves on their product. Now this brings up a couple of things that I want to point out to you about this bottle. So the mark itself is a little SIV with a little star, which I'll put an example of up here, that was envisioned by William's wife, Margie. Now, she was the perfect example of behind every great man, there's a great woman. She was the marketer for this product, and she came up with this, the red, waxy, iconic thing that you've got going on with this bottle. She also designed the label and the mark. Now, what does the mark mean, right? So it's got a little star, which is an indicator for the Star Hill Farm, which used to be the family's old farm. The S is for Samuel, and the IV is for Samuel being the 4th generation of distillers in his family. Now, William's son actually found out that he was the 6th in generation of distillers. So it would not surprise me if someday Makers decides to flip that number around. But anyway, there's one more thing I want to point out about this bottle. So they call it Maker's Mark Whiskey without the E. Now it is a bourbon, so it would be customary for it to have an E. But the reason that they didn't, and I did a little bit of research, I found a tweet here where they say that they just wanted to, kind of bring forth their heritage from Irish and Scottish and use their spelling. So it's as simple as that. Let's go into the nosing and the tasting. You'll note that this bottle has a cap, which, as I've talked about in several other videos, doesn't really make a big difference. If I had to take a guess, I would say that they put the cap on there just to make sure that none of this wax gets in there. And one thing I learned about the wax, which I forgot to mention earlier, is that, they say every bottle's different because the wax kind of drips different, but I guess while they're dipping it, if they really, really put it in there and the wax goes all the way down to here, they call it a slam dunk, and I just found that pretty funny. So, all right, let's go ahead and nose this whiskey and see what we get. All right, so the first thing that you're gonna get is just light and crispy, all day long. It's just very light. You know, you got honey, you've got sweetness, and that comes from the 70% corn and the extra 16% wheat. There's really nothing to bringing it down until that 14% malted barley. And that just adds a little bit of a cinnamon note to it. So let's go ahead and taste. Cheers. All right, so I typically write a script for this, and I think that this is one of those instances where my wordsmithing is just totally gonna fail me. I don't know how to describe to you how delicious this whiskey is. This is a bourbon that you should absolutely keep on your shelf. Now, the reason that I have a little bit of a tough time with this is that there's really nothing different about this bourbon as far as the flavor profile. But where I think it stands out is the proportions. You know, you've got typical bourbon flavors. You got vanilla, you got cinnamon, honey, just regular sweetness in general. And in this one, I think it's really just, like I said, the proportions. You've got the vanilla kind of just being chased by the honey, and then a little bit of cinnamon sneaks in there, and then you just finish with sweet. And it's just a really, really good bourbon. I can see why most people make their Manhattans or their Old Fashions or just sip this whiskey and keep it in their shelves, on their shelves. So I would recommend that you do the same thing. I know I will. The last thing I want to talk about is the finish. So the finish is interesting. So you take your sip, and it's very smooth, and it goes down to about here before it just kind of comes back with a vengeance, and it, you know, just lights a little fire for a split second, and it's really not that hot, but it lets you know it's there, and I find that pretty interesting about this whiskey. So that about does it for this episode of the Whiskey Dictionary. Thank you for watching. One thing I'd like to note is that I've completely revamped my Patreon. So if you were hesitant to donate before, it's just $1 now. So it's $1, gets you all of the benefits that everybody else gets. And, you know, this extra content, I do like a blooper reel every now and then, and just, you know, pictures and random posts. We have little conversations on there occasionally. So if you were hesitant to join before, now might be a good time. So, like I said, that does it for this episode of the Whiskey Dictionary, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.